Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold had to certify the primary ballots yesterday, which she did, including putting Trump's name on that list for now, per the Colorado Supreme Court's order. But the matter is far from settled, and a lot could still change depending on what the Supreme Court has to say in the next several weeks. Joining me now is Jena Griswold, the Secretary of State for Colorado, the chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. And I have to say, Secretary Griswold, you and I have talked for a long time. You've been a great friend of the show. I wasn't guessing that you were going to become the most famous and central Secretary of State in the entire country. But here you are. You are in the middle of the biggest constitutional question that we are facing on this day as it regards the next election. You made a decision last night to put Donald Trump's name on the ballot because your ballots have to be printed, your primaries on March the 5th. Explain that decision to us.
Good morning, Allie, and always a pleasure to see you. I do think that the Colorado Supreme Court got it right. Donald Trump incited an insurrection. The U.S. Constitution prohibits candidates who engage in insurrection from being on the ballot, and so he is disqualified. However, the Colorado Supreme Court said that if an appeal was filed by January 4th, Trump would be presumed on the ballot until the U.S. Supreme Court acted. And that's exactly what happened. So I did certify Trump to the ballot. Ballots for overseas and military voters will actually go out this month. And so it's really urgent that the Supreme Court acts swiftly so Coloradans and frankly, all Americans know whether someone who engaged in insurrection can run for the highest office in this country again.
And I guess I want to ask you, because you and I have talked very regularly in the last several months about this particular issue. And one thing that you have known since day one, since this idea of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which many of us had never paid much attention to, you as a Secretary of State would have understood it. You have said from the beginning, in the end, while you are the Secretary of State, while you administer the elections in Colorado, you knew that lots of other people would have to weigh in, i.e. other courts. So you know that the microscope is on you, and you are now trying to do everything you can do, despite knowing what you know about Donald Trump and the insurrection. You're trying to do everything you can to foresee everything that can go wrong and everybody who will challenge you for your decisions.
That's right. This is such a big case. Donald Trump, obviously, is the most popular Republican candidate in the Republican primary. And how he acts is trying to grab onto power by any means. So, I think it was evident from the beginning that any challenge to his candidacy would be litigated. I do think it's important to say that no matter what happens, whether he's on the ballot or disqualified from the ballot, that's not the end of this saga. Democracy will not die because some court decision. Americans have all the power in the world at the ballot box next year. And I am so confident in the American voter. And I'm sure that we'll hold on to democracy past the next election.
But you are of the view, in sort of opposition to a number of political pundits who've been on to say, there are people who've said this is the wrong way to do it, that getting rid of Donald Trump should be done at the ballot as a political process. You share the view of most legal minds, including Judge Luttig, who I'm going to speak to in a few moments, that the law is the law. The Constitution is the Constitution. The way you run the elections in terms of qualification is what it is. In the same way that I cannot run to be the president of the United States because I'm a naturalized citizen, it's not a penalty. It's a rule. And in your estimation, Donald Trump does not meet the qualifications to run for president of the United States.
As Secretary of State, it's my duty to uphold the law and the Constitution, and that comes first before any type of political strategy. So to tell you, the political strategy doesn't even weigh in to decision making. The law and the Constitution does. And I think it's very evident that Donald Trump did engage in insurrection. Only 2 courts in this nation have grappled with that question. Both determined that he did. And on top of that, we all saw what happened on January 6, 2021. We saw it with our own eyes. We don't need experts to tell us whether it was an insurrection or not. And then on top of that, Allie, I just fundamentally disagree that there should be some carve out in the Constitution for the president. Donald Trump should not be above the law, above the Constitution. A president should not have that type of power. It would set an extremely dangerous precedent to say a president can break whatever law or constitutional provision that they want to as president. That is what would really lead us to a downward spiral and a degrading of democracy like we've never seen before in this country.
In the last hour, I spoke with your colleague from Maine, the Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, who concluded that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is self-executing, meaning that it's a criminal prosecution isn't necessary in this case to determine whether Donald Trump is disqualified. However, as you just pointed out, there wasn't a criminal prosecution in this case, but there was a process, a very robust process in Colorado and Maine that determined that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. So we're not guessing about this. It's not even based on sort of the video that we watched, that we've all seen. There was a real process. And as I asked her, I'm going to ask you, tell me just what's the short version so that you can explain to people that you're not freelancing on this. You engaged in a rigorous process.
Yes, no freelancing on these decisions. A case was filed in Colorado on September 6th of last year. It led to a 5-day trial. Donald Trump was able to call every single witness he wanted. He was able to present evidence. The judge bent over backwards to make sure that he could present evidence. And I think it's noteworthy, Allie, because some people are saying, oh, there wasn't enough due process. There was enough due process. This was a real trial. And Donald Trump did everything he could to evade showing up. He refused to show up. He refused to take depositions. And now he wants to argue to the United States Supreme Court, well, the process wasn't fair. That's not how it works. Just because you choose not to engage doesn't mean it wasn't fair. And it's just, a characteristic of Trump. He wants all the rules to bend towards him in his whatever is the best outcome for him. He wants to try to manipulate the situation. That's not how courts work. So it was a robust process at the trial level. And then there was an appeal to the Colorado Supreme Court. And of course, last word will be had by the United States Supreme Court. Oral arguments are on February 8th.
And we will talk again. Thank you, as always, for being such a good friend to our show and to making things so clear for our viewers. Jena Griswold is the Secretary of State for Colorado.